How do you actually know if a rental property is a good property? Because most properties can look like a good deal until you start peeling away the numbers. So numbers can be adjusted, rents can be eliminated, and everything can look fine on the surface until you actually own it. So the real question is not how to find a deal, but when you do find a property, how to tell if it is a deal. So in this video, I'm going to be breaking down what numbers matter and how you can verify and so the real question is not how to find deals, but more how to evaluate them in a way that actually reduces your dependence on one income stream instead of increasing your risk. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through how to think about rental properties as a performing asset and what numbers really matter and how to tell the difference between a stable property and one that just looks good on paper. So I'm Nancy Wallace-Laabs, and I have over 20 years of experience in investing in single-family properties. I also used to own a property management company for many years, all single-family. I'm a licensed real estate broker in Texas, and I'm a national speaker on how to invest and how to transition from your current job into real estate investing. So you can grab our How to Find the Deals guide. It's a free guide that we have. There'll be a description below. Or if you're ready to just have a conversation, I invite you to call me at 469-430-9885. So most investors look at the wrong things when they're looking for, their first rental property. So what most investors do is they ask vague questions like, oh, is this a deal? Instead of like, okay, is this a deal, right? Sometimes you overanalyze a property. I know sometimes I can be guilty of this if I want to really, really make sure that this is indeed a good deal. And you second guess yourself until the deal is just no longer a deal or someone else snatched it up. So you don't want to rely on your gut feeling, right? You just don't want to go, oh, I think this is a good deal because it's in a good area. I don't have to do a whole lot of maintenance. I don't have to do a lot of repairs. So when you get to the point where you're like acting like a smart or thinking like a smart investor, so you're going to be using a repeatable number-based formula that works every single time. You're going to evaluate quickly, like you should be able to evaluate whether a property that you're looking at is a deal within about 15 minutes or less as you get better. You're going to move with confidence as you confirm your numbers, and you're going to build wealth systematically, not just by luck. So there's 3 numbers, but only one decision. Okay, so the 3 numbers that you want to pay attention to is first, monthly cash flow. Now, let's say that this property is, it's vacant when you look at it, or you're buying it from a seller who's been living there. So how do you verify that? So you're going to have to know what the rental rates are in that neighborhood for that particular type of property. And then you're going to want to look at the equity position. So are you buying below market value? So I always teach about finding off-market deals or how to negotiate with sellers, because if you're paying retail, then what that means is that you're not leaving yourself much margin as far as, what you owe on the property and what it's worth. And then the annual wealth movement, which is really what's the true yearly financial impact year over year. So is it appreciation? Is it tax benefits? So what is it? So let's talk first about monthly cash flow, because I think everybody kind of gets that. That's basically, how much money the property is making after you've done your payments, your bills, your expenses of insurance, mortgage payment, property taxes, maintenance, all those kinds of things. And then you take in income. So the expenses minus the income, or income minus expenses, and then that gives you your monthly cash flow. Now, I do want to preface this because I don't go out and buy properties for, huge amounts of cash flow. If I can get it, great, but that's not my number one goal. My number one goal is the equity, which we're going to talk about in a minute, because sometimes there are deferred maintenance issues, so the bottom line is you got to buy the property right the very first time you put it under contract, right? So you've got to do your inspections, because sometimes the monthly cash flow is maybe, there hasn't been a rental increase, or, maybe the area is going to be developing. So there's a lot of things that go into monthly cash flow. What I don't want, and I don't want this for you, is I don't want a property that's sucking me dry, meaning I'm spending $500 to $1,000 a month, because it's upside down. So you don't want that. So you want to get as much positive cash flow as you can. Now, monthly cash flow, and let's just break it down, right? So we have your mortgage payment. Unless you're fortunate enough to just be buying all these properties with cash, you're going to have some kind of loan on the property, whether that's a conventional loan or that's a private money loan or hard money loan. You're going to have some kind of payment for just acquiring that property. And then you can't get away from it, but there's always taxes and insurance. So property taxes here in Texas, and then property insurance. And you want to make sure you have the right kind of insurance for your property. So for example, if you are rehabbing a property, you may need some kind of builder grade policy. I forget what they call it. We're going to have an insurance gal on here, but it's a policy like when you're doing renovations as opposed to someone actually living in it. Then there's landlord policies. Then there's a special policy if you're making it a short-term rental. So you want to make sure you're very comfortable with the types of insurance that you need to make sure you're covered. And then you want to have that maintenance reserve, like what if something goes wrong? What if the, AC goes out, that kind of thing. And then are you going to have property management, or are you going to do it yourself? So typically property managers charge around 8 to 10%. So don't take that to the bank in terms of, I only want to pay 8%, because it's really the quality of the property management that you want to spend more time on. So where does all that rent money go that you're going to be collecting it? Well, let's just say you have cash flow, your profit is 27%. You got 15% that goes to taxes and insurance, 8 to 10% to the property management. You got your mortgage payment, which is going to be by far the biggest expense that you'll have. And then you should factor in about 8% for your Okay, let's break it down what monthly cash flow really is. Just the simple formula is it's monthly rent minus your expenses, right? So almost everyone is going to have the same expenses month over month. You're going to have a mortgage payment, of some type of loan on the property, unless you were fortunate enough to pay cash, right? So then you're going to have taxes and insurance. You want to make sure you have the right coverage for your property. You may elect to have property management, which is another 8 to 10% right off the top. And then you want to have a maintenance reserve. So you can see that the monthly rent minus the expenses is the cash flow. And why does that matter? Well, you want to target any positive number. So even if that number is only like $50 to $100 a month, when I buy properties, I don't always go for, how much monthly cash flow. That's just one number in the formula. Because if I'm buying in an appreciating area, or I'm getting, just a really great deal on the property, but right now it's not cash flowing, meaning I'm not making $200, $300, $400, $500 a month, but that's okay, because in the back end I'm getting all these benefits from taxes and things like that. So don't get too hung up on monthly cash flow. What you do want to pay attention to is you don't want to be in the hole, right? So when you're figuring out what the rent is, you're going to need to know what the rental rates in the area are. So you have to figure out, how much income, whether that's through a short-term rental or long-term rental, mid-term rentals, you want to know what your income is and then your monthly expenses. And when you put that formula together, that will give you then the monthly cash flow. So where does all that rent money go? So let's just say you're collecting that $2,000 a month and you're like, oh, wow, that's great. I get $2,000 a month because I bought a rental property. Quit the job. No, that's not what I'm saying at all. So you got to look out, where does the majority of the money go? Well, 40% right off the bat is going to that mortgage payment. Now, that could be, you might have a hard money lender, you might have a private money lender, maybe, you're going to do a cash out refi, but you're going to have some kind of mortgage payment, right? Then you're going to want to look at, okay, am I even getting 27% cash flow? So on a property that's let's call it the $2,000 a month in rent, 27% would be almost $500. So if you're getting that, hey, that's great. If you're not, you have to kind of look at why you're not. Then you may decide, I managed my properties for a really long time, so you may decide that you're going to manage them yourself. If you're working a full-time job and you only have one or two, it might be doable, but you might want to invest in a property management company. And we all have those taxes and insurance, and it'd be nice to get it, get out of there, but it's just the cost of doing business. Now, let's look at the purchase price versus market value. And this is when we're going to be talking about the equity, right? How much equity you're getting in the property when you buy it. Because if you buy it right, then everything else falls into place. So where the deals are made or lost is how you buy it and what you buy it for. So equity position. So this is kind of your built-in safety net. So what is equity position? Well, it's the gap, right, between what you pay and what the property is worth. So let's say the property is worth $300,000 and you purchased it for $200,000. So technically, you would have about $100,000 worth of equity in the property. Now, in that $100,000, you may have $50,000 worth of repairs. So now your equity stake is really only $50,000, but it's still a good deal. So it's the gap between what you pay for the property and what it's actually worth right now or after light improvements. And why this is so critical is that's how, when you hear people talking about how they make money in real estate, this is how they do it. This is the secret sauce. This is the number one thing. You have to buy it right. The equity acts as a buffer. Why? Because then you will be able to do, a cash out refi if you're having to do a full rehab. You have some leverage you can maximize later on down the road. So the protection is that the equity shields you if the market shifts or the values dip temporarily. Real estate is like that roller coaster. Sometimes it goes up, sometimes it goes down, but the thing is that you can always write it out if you buy it right. Even sometimes when you buy a property wrong, if you just hold it long enough, it'll correct itself. And then you have the margin. So this creates flexibility for you to be able to leverage equity. And by leveraging your equity, okay, which I mean is that think of it as like a piggy bank, right? The piggy bank that has X number of dollars in it, and when you have a tenant, and that piggy bank is actually increasing in value because the tenant is paying down your mortgage and it's giving you even more equity that you can leverage, and you can leverage that equity to go and buy other properties. You can be on the upside, if you make some, sometimes even just minor improvements, redoing a kitchen or a bath. And when I say minor, it's $5,000-$10,000 is kind of a minor cosmetic, but you can add so much value to a property, even if you were able to add a bathroom. Right? So a lot of times when, I look at a house and it's got 1.5 baths, I will look at how much will it cost to make that half bathroom into a full bath, because that adds great value to a property. Another tip that I do is I look at homes where they have converted the garage. So if it's an original 3-bedroom, 2-bath home, and then they converted the garage to make either another living room or another, bedroom or something like that, I will actually convert that room back to a garage, because most people like having a garage, and garages add about $40,000-ish value to your property, right? And then confidence, knowing that you bought that property right because you knew what formulas and what numbers to pay attention to. So how equity position looks in practice, bad deal or good deal. So the purchase price, if it's a bad deal, the purchase price equals market value. This means that you paid retail for that property. You have no equity. There's no margin for error. error, and that leaves you very vulnerable and risk exposed. So if something happens, like you probably hear stories about people. I've been in different markets back in 2008 and during COVID, and people were just going crazy. You've heard about people paying 50, 60, 70, 80, 100 grand over, in bidding wars. And so then what happens a year or two down the road, they want to sell them and they can't because they're upside down. And this was really a big factor back in 2008. So, but a good deal, if the purchase price is less than the market value, you always want to buy under. You never want to pay. It's kind of like, when you go shopping and, you always want to get, who doesn't love a good sale, right? So think of it when you're buying investment properties, you want to buy it on sale, right? So you want to have that built-in equity of $30,000 to $50,000. And that gives you somewhat of a protected margin, a flexibility, right? And it goes to your bottom line as your net worth, because it on paper, you're really building your net worth, and which then in return, you will be able to leverage that equity to get more money, to buy more properties. Now, let's talk about this annual wealth movement, the number that changes everything. Well, what could that be? Are you excited to learn about this? So annual wealth movement is just the full picture. This is how true wealth is built. This is how your net worth keeps going up with each investment property that you purchase. So it's the monthly cash flow is just one piece. Remember I said that? I don't always look for properties that have, gobs and gobs of monthly cash flow, right? I'm looking for properties where there's a lot of equity that I can buy because I'm getting a good deal, and that I know I'm in an appreciating area. So it adds up to all three of these things, right? So you've got your cash flow, you've got your principal pay down, and appreciation. Now, I didn't put in here tax benefits, but tax benefits are also kind of part of that because, for example, I'm a self-employed person. And so I created an LLC many years ago to buy investment properties. And so that gives me some leverages for deductions and things like that can then offset my, regular income that I'm not paying taxes on in terms of, because I'm a realtor, right? And we, most of the time our the money that we get paid, there's no taxes out of it, right? So combined, these three forces can generate $15,000 to $30,000 in annual wealth movement, right? When you look at how much is the property appreciating year over year? When you have a tenant in there, it's paying down your principal, so you're gaining more equity. And then your cash flow, as that principal gets paid down, your cash flow continues to grow as well. So this is where the full picture, if you will. And granted, when you're first looking at a property, you're going to be looking at all these numbers. So the main thing is, how much income can this property produce for you? And what are the expenses that are going to be associated with purchasing that property? And when you look at that and then you combine the equity position that you just got because you're getting it under the market price, you're not paying retail, you're getting it on sale, and then the growth appreciation year over year, which depending on the market you're in could be anywhere from 4 to 10% year over year, then that's when you have a real picture. Is this a good rental property? Now, let's watch that math in action, right? So look at year one. So the three streams of wealth that we're creating from one rental property, right? So we're going to stack it year after year, and this is how a single property quietly shifts. This is not like, hey, we're blowing it out or anything like this. This is over time. I think I've mentioned this before. Real estate investing, yes, there are those stories where people hit it out of the park and they, make a lot of money on the flip or whatnot. But when you're building wealth, legacy wealth going on, it's a slow kind of, think about the turtle and the hare story, right? The turtle keeps going. He's consistent. He keeps building. He keeps going. And the hare's over here, running around and, gets distracted and whatnot. But you're staying steady with this. So you have your annual cash flow, the principal pay down, and then the appreciation. So you can see in year 5 how much equity and how much this property is adding to your bottom line. And that's really what you want to look at. So it's the three numbers. It's the monthly cash flow, it's the equity, and then the appreciation that shows the annual wealth movement. That's what we call it. Now, putting it all together, just to recap, so we got your monthly cash flow. So that tells you, can this property sustain itself? So if you have a property that's just sucking your savings, it's just not doing you're just not making any money. It's not an appreciating area. Then that was not a good buy. It might have looked good on paper, but did you do the numbers, right? Equity position, what it tells you. Did you buy a deal or a dud, right? I mean, that's really what we're talking about here. And then annual wealth movement is looking at that property as a whole. The monthly cash flow, the equity, the sales price that you got. You didn't pay retail, and then the appreciation year after year. So here's your takeaways for this video. Number one, you want to look at cash flow first. That's just that kind of that marker. It's like, okay, what's the rental rate? So if you have identified an area where you're going to be investing in, then one of your numbers that you would have looked at is how much rent can I get from a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, for example, right? And then you want to buy equity, not just the property. So if the property is valued at $300,000, are you going to pay $300,000? No. You're going to negotiate with that seller. You're looking for a distressed property, an off-market property. A lot of times properties on the MLS are what we call retail. Those are retail properties. So it's hard to find a deal. Now, if you, find a seller that is distressed, and, sometimes realtors will put in the comments, handyman special or whatnot. But even that I have found not to be very good deals. I like to find my own off-market properties for the very best negotiating price that I can do. And then think annually, not monthly. So remember I said don't get hung up on the monthly cash flow. Yes, you don't want it to be $500 in the red, behind. But if it's $50, $100, that might be okay if everything else lines up. So the wealth in real estate comes from the combination of the cash flow, the principal pay down. What that means is that your tenant, when he or she is paying you rent, you're taking that money and you're applying it on the mortgage. You're not going to spend it on a vacation or anything. And then the appreciation. So it's the full circle, if you will, the full picture is more powerful than any single one by itself. Now, your quick deal evaluation checklist. So you're going to look for cash flow. You're going to look at price versus market, and then wealth movement, which is just looking at the appreciation year over year. And when you use these three numbers on any property, it'll work on any property, then those numbers will point you in the right direction if this is a good deal. So you can do these numbers in a very short amount of time. There's lots of tools that you can do that with. If you need help with that, you can always reach out to me and I can kind of walk you through it. But if one or more falls short, you have a negotiating tool, right? So if the property, let's say it's a retail property and it's been sitting on the market for 2 years. Okay, I actually got a really good deal on a house because it had been on the market for over 1 year. And finally I was able to bring comps to the owner and say, look, your property's been sitting here for 1 year. This is why it didn't sell, because he literally had it priced too high. So you can use any one of these as cash flow, and it could be on the cash flow. The current rents could be skewed because it's only like a 3-bedroom, 1-bath. So you can do your research about that too, about, are you looking at similar properties to see what the income potential is. Now, are you ready to find deals that actually work? Well, here we have my daughter and I, Kelsey, and we put together the Finding Deals Guide, right? It's a free guide that you can download that will help you start finding deals, give you some seller scripts and things like that. But if you're already, you want to just talk to us about, well, how can I get started or whatever, you can always reach out at 469-430-9885. And lastly, we do have a masterclass, a free webinar that you'll find the link in the description. And if you're just wondering, how does that one rental property work? Well, we've spelled it out in a specific video just for you. So thanks so much for joining me. And don't forget to watch my next video that will show you how much money do you actually need to buy a rental property. All right, I'll see you again. Bye-bye.